This is my true story. I was a quiet grandmother who thought love never fades inside a family. But time proved me wrong. My children forgot me, my room grew smaller, and silence became my companion. Only my grandson still came, asking questions that made my heart ache. One day he said, "Grandma, why don't they love you?" I told him, "One day you'll understand." I never imagined that day would come through tears. Yesterday he came home crying. He had seen my face on the news, the story of an old woman who became a millionaire. Before I tell you everything, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. After my husband passed away, the house felt too big for one person. My children said they would take care of me. They said I didn't have to worry about anything. I believed them. I packed a few clothes, some photos, and my medicines and moved into my eldest son's home. I thought I would spend my last years surrounded by family, by laughter, by love. But things didn't turn out that way. At first, they were kind. My daughter-in-law smiled, brought me tea, asked if I needed anything. My son promised to set up a small room for me. I waited patiently, never wanting to be a burden. But as days passed, their kindness grew thinner, like a thread stretched too tight. I started noticing the silence. Meals were taken without me. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. They spoke to me only when they needed something signed or when guests were around. They gave me a room at the back of the house, small and away from everyone else. It had one bed, one window, and an old cupboard. I told myself it was enough. I tried to stay grateful, but the truth is, it was not enough. It was isolation dressed as care. I spent hours alone, staring at the wall, waiting for footsteps that rarely came. I could hear them laughing in the living room, the sound of television, the clinking of plates, the smell of food I didn't eat. It reminded me that I existed in the same house, yet not in the same world. I called my daughter sometimes, but she was always busy. She said she would visit soon, but soon never came. My other son lived in another city. He called once every few months. His words were polite but cold. He spoke like a stranger doing his duty. I stopped expecting warmth. I stopped expecting anything. People say loneliness is loud, but mine was quiet. It sat in my chest and made breathing heavy. Only my grandson came to see me often. He was small, curious, and full of questions. He didn't care about adult things. He just liked to talk. He would bring his toys into my room and play on the floor while I watched. He would ask me about my childhood, my husband, the old house. I told him stories, and he listened like no one else ever did. When he smiled, it was real. When he hugged me, it felt like sunlight on cold skin. For those few moments, I felt alive again. I started waiting for his visits. I kept candies in a jar, saved biscuits from my tea, just for him. I made sure my room was always clean and smelled nice because I didn't want him to think his grandmother lived in sadness. But sometimes, he would ask questions that hurt. He would ask why I never sat at the big dining table, why his parents didn't invite me to outings, why I ate alone. I never had an answer. I just smiled and said I was tired. When he wasn't around, the days stretched endlessly. I watched the world from my small window. Children playing outside, neighbors walking their dogs, the mailman dropping letters. Life kept moving, but mine stood still. My hands shook more each day, my eyes blurred, but no one noticed. I didn't ask for help anymore. Asking only made them sigh. I folded my pain into silence and learned to live quietly. Sometimes, late at night, I could hear them talking about money, about how expensive everything was, about inheritance, about my pension. I didn't want to believe they were planning around me, but deep down, I knew. I had become a number to them, not a person. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could fade so easily after all the years I gave. Still, I kept hope. I thought one day they would remember the woman who raised them, who worked day and night to keep food on the table. But that day never came. Each morning started with silence and ended with silence. My only comfort was the soft knock on my door, my grandson's voice saying, "Grandma, are you awake?" That voice reminded me I still mattered to someone, even if the rest of the house forgot. One afternoon the house was quiet. The sun came through my small window, warm and soft. My grandson came running in as usual, carrying his toy car. He sat on the floor, making little sounds of engines and crashes. I watched him, smiling, feeling grateful for that small joy. He looked up suddenly, his eyes serious. He asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Grandma, why don't they love you?" The words fell like stones inside my heart. I froze for a moment, trying to hide the pain that rose in my chest. I didn't want him to see that hurt. He was too young to understand what it means to be forgotten by your own children. I smiled softly and reached out to pat his head. I told him, "One day you'll understand." He looked confused but nodded, as if my answer made sense to him. He went back to playing, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. That one question had opened everything I had been trying to keep buried. After he left, I sat alone for hours thinking about it. Why didn't they love me anymore? Or maybe they did, just in a way that didn't look like love. Maybe they thought paying bills and keeping a roof over my head was enough. Maybe they didn't know that love is not about things, it's about presence, about time, about looking someone in the eye and saying, "I remember you." I didn't need money or comfort, I needed kindness. But kindness had become rare in this house. I thought about the years I had spent raising them. Every meal I cooked, every night I stayed awake waiting for them to come home, every worry I carried in silence. I never asked for much in return, just respect, just warmth, just a little space in their hearts. But it seemed that space had been filled with pride, ambition, and greed. I didn't recognize them anymore. They moved like strangers in the house I built. The question my grandson asked stayed in my mind. It echoed every night when I lay down to sleep. I realized that children see truth before adults hide it. He saw my loneliness, my silence, the way they spoke to me. He saw how they ignored me, how they treated me like furniture. He didn't need to understand money or inheritance to see that love was missing. His innocence showed me what I had been denying for years. I wasn't loved anymore. I was tolerated. That thought hurt deeply, but it also opened something inside me. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had to find a way to live again, even if it meant starting from nothing. I didn't want pity. I wanted freedom. I wanted to be more than just a burden waiting quietly to die. In the days that followed, I started noticing everything differently. The way they avoided sitting with me at meals, the way my son's wife looked annoyed if I asked a question, the way my calls went unanswered. The love I once thought would hold this family together had turned into distance that no one wanted to close. Every small act of neglect became a reminder that I was invisible. But when my grandson visited, the world felt soft again. He still smiled, still asked questions, still held my hand without hesitation. He didn't care that my clothes were old or that my room was small. To him, I was just Grandma, the only one who listened to his stories, the only one who still looked at him with pride. He reminded me that love still existed, even if it came from the smallest heart in the house. That night, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I would not let their coldness define my last years. I would not fade away waiting for love that would never return. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way to stand on my own again. My grandson's question had planted something in me, not bitterness, but resolve. I had been quiet for too long. Now it was time to begin again. My grandson's question stayed in my heart long after he left that day. I looked around my small room and saw everything I owned, a few clothes, an old photo frame, and a tin box with my medicines. That was all. Once I had a home full of furniture, jewelry, and memories. Now I had a corner to myself in a house that used to be mine. I had given everything to my children, trusting them completely. I thought love was stronger than money. I thought family could never betray me. I was wrong. It had started years ago, after my husband passed away. I was too lost in grief to notice the papers they brought me to sign. My son said it was for the electricity bill, for the house transfer, for easy handling. I signed everything. I didn't think twice. I was tired and heartbroken, and I believed he only wanted to help. Slowly, everything that was mine, the house, the savings, the pension, went under their names. By the time I realized what I had done, it was too late. When I asked about it, they said it was for convenience, that I didn't need to worry, but the tone changed soon after. They stopped discussing anything with me. My name disappeared from documents, from bank accounts, even from the list of property owners. I became a guest in my own life. I didn't tell anyone, not even my grandson. I didn't want to poison his childhood with the truth about his parents. I carried that shame quietly, like a secret I couldn't put down. Sometimes I looked at my hands and remembered how many years I had worked to build that house, how many meals I cooked, how many nights I stayed awake waiting for my husband to come home. Every brick in that house was built from our sweat and love. But my children didn't see that. They saw only what it was worth. They saw numbers, not memories. They saw property, not love. And once they had it, they stopped seeing me at all. There were days when I didn't even have money to buy small things for myself. I asked my daughter-in-law once for a little cash, and she sighed as if I had asked for gold. After that, I stopped asking. I started keeping small coins in an old box, saving them from the little pension they allowed me to receive each month. I used it to buy tea, biscuits, and sometimes a flower for my husband's photo. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It reminded me that I still existed. At night, I would sit on my bed and go through old letters. Letters from my husband, from friends, from relatives who had long stopped writing. I read them again and again, just to remember what love sounded like. I wondered how my life had changed so quietly, how betrayal could look so ordinary. There was no shouting, no big fight, just a slow fading of care, a quiet theft of everything I had. It's strange how people can take everything from you while still smiling at you. I could have told someone, I could have complained, but I didn't. I didn't want to be a burden, or worse, a spectacle. Old people are supposed to be wise, not pitied. So I kept my pain private. I learned to live with less, to speak less, to need less. I convinced myself that maybe this was what growing old meant, being replaced by the next generation, being pushed to the edges while pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I knew I had been wronged. I just didn't know what to do about it. I prayed every night, asking for strength, asking for one chance to stand again, not for revenge, but for dignity. I wanted to prove to myself that I was not finished yet, that life hadn't taken everything from me. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself I would find a way. I would find something that was mine again, something they couldn't take or sign away. That promise kept me alive. It gave me a small spark of purpose in the long days of silence. And slowly, that spark turned into a plan. After years of silence, something inside me began to change. I had spent so long waiting for others to care that I had forgotten how to care for myself. One morning, I woke up before sunrise and decided I would not sit in that small room another day doing nothing. I didn't have much strength, but I still had my mind. I decided to use it. I put on my old shawl, tied my shoes, and quietly walked out of the house. No one noticed. No one asked where I was going. It was better that way. The streets were quiet. I walked slowly, breathing in the cold morning air. I hadn't been outside like that in months. The world looked different, brighter, freer. I went to the local library because I remembered it was one of the few places that still welcomed old people without question. The librarian smiled when she saw me. She didn't ask why I was there. She simply guided me to a chair and asked if I needed anything. That small kindness almost made me cry. I started spending a few hours there every day. I read newspapers, old books, and government pamphlets about pension schemes, aid programs, and senior rights. At first, it was confusing. The forms were long, the rules complicated, but I didn't give up. I took notes. I asked the librarian for help with words I didn't understand. Each day, I learned something new, not just about the system, but about myself. I realized I wasn't as helpless as everyone wanted me to believe. Then one day, I saw a small notice in the newspaper. It said the government was starting a new lottery program for senior citizens, a pension draw for those above 65. The winner would receive a large one-time payment to help them live independently. I read it twice, then 3 times. My heart beat fast. I didn't think about the money at first. I thought about what it meant. A chance to start over. A chance to live with dignity again. I decided I would apply. It took me days to fill out the form. I didn't tell anyone. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law. This was mine, my small act of rebellion. I gathered every document I had, my old ID, my pension card, my voter slip. Some papers were torn, some stained, but they were proof that I still existed. I walked back to the office, stood in line with other elders, and submitted the form myself. When the clerk stamped it and said, "Done," I felt a strange calm. For the first time in years, I had done something for me. After that, my visits to the library became my secret routine. I didn't tell my family where I went. They never asked anyway. They assumed I was sleeping or wasting time in my room. I let them think that. In truth, I was building a small piece of freedom, one form and one step at a time. I started reading more about financial aid and support systems. I even helped another old woman at the library fill out her form. We became quiet friends. We shared tea and stories of being forgotten. At home, nothing changed. The cold food still came to my door. The voices still ignored me. But inside me, something was different. I had a reason to wake up every morning. I wasn't waiting for love anymore. I was waiting for my chance. Every night I prayed not for wealth, but for a new beginning. I didn't know if I would win. I didn't even think I deserved luck, but I wanted to try. Trying made me feel alive. Months passed. The routine continued. I grew used to my secret life. Quiet mornings at the library, quiet nights in my room. No one knew what I was doing, and that made it special. It was the one thing they couldn't take from me. I had lived my life giving everything to others. This was the first thing I had kept for myself. Sometimes I would look at my grandson and imagine telling him one day that his grandmother had done something brave, that she had found a way to stand again without anyone's help. I didn't know if that day would ever come, but the thought gave me hope. And hope, I learned, was stronger than love when love disappears. Months passed after I submitted that form. I kept going to the library, but nothing new came. Some days I wondered if my name had even been entered. Maybe they lost it. Maybe it was just another promise meant to keep people quiet. Still, I didn't give up. I had nothing else to wait for, so I waited for that. It gave my life a small purpose, something to look forward to even if it never happened. My children didn't know. They didn't care to ask. They were too busy with their lives, their friends, their phones. At home, the days all looked the same. I woke up early and made my bed. No one greeted me. The kitchen door stayed closed most mornings. Sometimes there was leftover food kept aside for me, cold and dry. I heated it quietly and ate alone. I didn't complain. Complaining only made them sigh or roll their eyes. Silence became my way of surviving. I spoke less and less until I almost forgot what my own voice sounded like. When they had guests, I stayed in my room. They never called me out. I could hear laughter, music, and clinking glasses. I used to host those gatherings once. Now I wasn't even invited to sit in my own living room. The few times I tried to come out, my daughter-in-law gave me that tight smile that meant, "Go back." I understood without words. I always understood without words. My son didn't say much anymore. When he did, it was about money or bills. His tone was distant, cold, the way people speak to someone they no longer see as family. I stopped trying to start conversations. The house had become full of noise but empty of connection. I existed in corners, in silence, in small spaces no one cared about. Even my birthdays passed quietly. One year, my grandson made me a card. It was drawn with crayons, full of hearts and flowers. He was proud of it. When he showed it to his parents, they barely looked up. They said, "That's nice," and went back to their phones. I could see his face fall. He didn't understand how love could be ignored so easily. I hugged him tightly and said it was the best gift I had ever received. And it was. It was made with pure heart, something I had forgotten people could still have. Some evenings I sat by my window and watched the neighbors. Their families ate together, talked together. I could hear bits of laughter carried by the wind. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were just to share a meal without shame. I wanted to be part of something like that again, not for luxury, but for warmth, for belonging. At night, when the house went quiet, I heard whispers, sometimes about me, sometimes about things they didn't want me to hear. Words like burden, expense, waste. They thought I couldn't hear, but old ears catch more than young ones think. Each word chipped at my heart, but I didn't let them see. I just lay still and stared at the ceiling, letting their voices fade into the dark. I began to notice how invisible I had become. They talked about me in front of me as if I wasn't there. They made decisions that affected my life without asking me. They used my pension for their expenses and called it managing family money. I had become background noise, useful only when needed. It's strange how people can live under the same roof and still be miles apart. But I didn't stop my small routines. I still went to the library. I still smiled at strangers. I still prayed before bed. Each small act felt like rebellion, proof that I still existed beyond their neglect. The loneliness was heavy, but it also became my teacher. It taught me patience. It taught me to find strength in silence. It taught me that love cannot be begged. It must be given freely. And through all of it, my grandson's visits stayed my only light. He would run in with his small shoes, talking about school, asking about my day. He didn't know how much those moments saved me. He didn't know that his laughter was the only thing keeping my heart alive. I prayed every night that he would grow up kind, that he would never forget how to love, because the world I lived in had forgotten, and I didn't want him to follow that path. Then one morning, everything changed. I was sitting by the window with my tea, watching the sky turn pale blue. The house was quiet as always. I heard the paperboy throw the newspaper at the gate, and something inside told me to fetch it myself. I went outside, slow but steady, feeling the cold ground under my feet. When I picked up the newspaper, I saw a headline printed in bold letters about the senior citizen pension lottery. My hands shook as I read the list of names. I blinked twice to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. My name was there, clear, printed, real. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I sat on the bench near the garden, staring at the page, unable to breathe. It felt unreal, like a dream I wasn't allowed to have. My name, the name they had erased from documents and deeds, was now written on the front page for everyone to see. It said I had won the government jackpot for retirees, 10 million rupees. I didn't smile. I didn't shout. I just sat there quietly, letting the air fill my lungs, letting the truth sink in. I went back to my room slowly, folded the newspaper carefully, and placed it on the bed. I looked around my small space, the plain walls, the cracked mirror, the single photo of my husband. For the first time, it didn't look like a prison. It looked like a beginning. I whispered softly to myself, thanking the life that had finally remembered me. I didn't think about what I would do with the money yet. I only thought about what it meant, proof that I was still seen, that I still mattered. All day, I moved quietly. I cooked my tea, watered my plant, and looked at the paper again and again. I wanted to be sure I hadn't imagined it. Every time I saw my name, my heart felt lighter. I remembered all the nights I had prayed for a second chance. This was it, not a miracle, but justice in its simplest form. When my grandson came home that afternoon, I was still sitting with the paper in my lap. He was too young to understand what it meant, so I didn't say anything. I wanted to protect his innocence a little longer. I tucked the paper away and smiled at him as he played. He asked me what was wrong because I looked different. I just told him I was happy. He didn't ask more, but he stayed longer that day, as if he could feel something had shifted in the air. That night, I lay awake, not from worry, but from excitement. I thought about how life had taken so much from me, yet still found a way to give something back. I thought about all the people who had looked down on me, spoken over me, forgotten me. I thought about how quiet my days had been and how loud this truth would be when they found out. I wasn't angry. I was calm. Life had done what I couldn't. It had shown them my worth. In the morning, I went to the government office to confirm it. The clerk looked at me, smiled, and said my name from the list. He congratulated me and handed me the documents. I held them tightly, feeling the paper against my palms like it was gold. The world outside looked brighter than it had in years. The trees, the street, the noise, everything felt alive again. When I returned home, I hid the documents safely under my clothes. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted one moment of peace before the storm. I sat by the window, sipping my tea, looking at the newspaper again. My reflection in the glass looked stronger, different, alive. I realized that even after all the pain, I hadn't lost myself. I was still here, and now the world knew it too. I spent the evening thinking about how to use the money. I didn't want luxury, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to live freely, with dignity. Maybe buy a small house for myself, maybe open something for women like me, who had been forgotten. I didn't need to plan everything yet. I had time. For once, time was mine. I looked at my husband's photo and whispered, "We did it." I smiled, and for the first time in many years, the smile reached my eyes. The next morning, the news spread faster than I could have imagined. I hadn't told a single person, but somehow the story found its way to every corner. I woke up early, as I always did, and when I turned on the old radio in my room, I heard my name. My own name, spoken clearly on a local station. "Elderly woman wins senior citizen pension lottery," the announcer said. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, holding my breath, listening as they described me, my age, my area, the photograph they had taken from my old ID. My hands trembled. It didn't feel real. I turned off the radio and sat in silence. Then, a few minutes later, I heard my phone buzzing on the small table. It never rang that early. When I picked it up, there were messages. Neighbors, distant relatives, even people I hadn't heard from in years, all congratulating me, all saying they saw me on TV. My picture was everywhere, the same one my children never bothered to frame, now being shown to the whole city. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I had lived so long being invisible that I forgot what it felt like to be seen, and now suddenly, the world saw me. They didn't know my story. They didn't know the silence behind that picture, but they saw my name, my face, my victory. I looked at the reflection in the mirror, old, wrinkled, tired, but glowing with something new. It wasn't pride, it was peace. I had been acknowledged. By afternoon, the news reached the house. I could hear my children in the living room talking loudly. Their voices were sharp, mixed with shock and disbelief. My daughter-in-law's tone was angry, confused. My son kept repeating my name like he couldn't believe it. I stayed in my room, quiet, pretending not to hear. It didn't matter anymore. They were finally talking about me, but for the first time, I didn't need their attention. Then, my grandson came running in, his eyes wide and wet. He was clutching his small tablet, his hands shaking. He looked at me and started crying before saying a word. He showed me the screen. There it was, my face on a news channel. The headline read, "Local grandmother wins 10 million pension draw." My grandson looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Grandma, that's you," he whispered. I smiled, though my throat felt tight. I held him close and wiped his tears. His innocence broke something inside me, but it also healed me. For years, he had asked why they didn't love me. Now, he didn't have to ask anymore. He saw the truth in their faces. He saw how they stared at the screen, shocked and speechless. The same people who ignored me now realized I existed, not just as their mother, but as a name the world knew. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I only hugged him tighter. All evening, the phone kept ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Neighbors came by, pretending they had always cared. I stayed quiet, polite but distant. Fame was never my goal. It was just the universe's way of returning my name to me. I had spent years being erased. Now, life had written me back in bold letters. That night, I sat on my bed and watched the news one last time. They showed my photo again, with gentle music playing in the background. They called me a symbol of hope. I smiled faintly. They didn't know the full story, but I was grateful. My story had finally found light. I looked at my grandson sleeping beside me, still holding his tablet close. His little face looked calm, trusting. I whispered softly that he would never have to understand loneliness the way I did. Because now things were different. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had something they couldn't take, not the money, but the strength that came with it. When the lights went out, I lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. I thought of all the nights I had prayed for a sign, for justice, for something to show that my life still meant something. The world had answered in its own quiet way. My name on the news wasn't just a headline, it was a promise that forgotten hearts can still be remembered, that silence can still speak loudly one day. The house was no longer quiet that evening. The same walls that had carried silence for years were now filled with noise. My children came home earlier than usual, voices loud, hurried, full of tension. I could hear my name spoken again and again from the living room. They weren't calling me with love. They were calling me with shock. They had all seen the news. My son's voice trembled when he said 10 million. My daughter-in-law kept asking if it was real. I didn't step out. I stayed in my room and waited. I knew this moment would come. Soon there was a knock on my door. Then another, louder. They called my name with a sweetness I hadn't heard in years. They asked if I was all right, if I had eaten, if I wanted anything. I didn't answer. My hands rested on my lap, calm and still. I listened as their voices grew desperate. For years they had forgotten I existed. Now suddenly I was important again. I almost wanted to laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. It was sad how money could make love return so fast. My grandson came in quietly through the half-open door. His face was red from crying earlier, but now he was smiling shyly. He ran to me and held my hand. He asked softly, "Grandma, are you rich now?" I looked at him and shook my head. "No, my dear," I said. "I'm free." He didn't understand, but he smiled anyway. That smile was all the answer I needed. It reminded me of why I had survived all those years of silence. Outside the door, I heard whispers again. My daughter had arrived too. Her voice was higher, impatient. They were arguing, not about me, but about what would happen next. I heard words like share, papers, transfer. The same kind of words that had once taken everything away from me. Only this time I wasn't helpless. I had learned. I had kept all the documents safe, locked away where only I could find them. Every letter, every certificate, every proof of my win. I had made sure this time nothing could be signed away. They knocked again, harder this time. They said they wanted to celebrate. They said they were proud of me. Their words sounded strange coming from mouths that had spent years staying silent. I stayed still. The tea on my table had gone cold, but I didn't touch it. I wasn't angry anymore, just calm. I knew that if I opened the door, they would pretend. Hugs, fake tears, promises that would disappear once the money was theirs. I had seen enough pretending in my life. I wouldn't allow more. My grandson looked confused. He didn't understand why I wasn't answering. He asked if I was upset. I told him gently that sometimes people only remember you when they want something. He looked at me with wide eyes, thinking hard, and then nodded like he understood a little. I patted his head and told him to go to his room. He didn't want to leave, but I told him it was okay. I didn't want him to see what would happen next. The knocking grew louder. The voices became impatient. I got up slowly, walked to the door, and locked it from the inside. The sound of the click was small but powerful. For years they had locked me out of their hearts. Tonight, I locked them out of my peace. I sat back down and waited for the noise to fade. They called my name again and again, but I didn't reply. Their words no longer had power over me. As the night went on, I heard them making calls, arguing among themselves. The same people who once told me not to worry about money were now fighting over mine. The irony almost made me smile. I realized that I no longer needed to explain anything to them. The world had already told my story. My silence now spoke louder than any words could. I looked at the newspaper again on my bed, the one with my name printed on it. I traced the letters with my fingers. It wasn't just about money, it was about worth. For years, they made me feel like I was nothing. Now life itself had written proof that I was something. I had not fought them. I had simply lived long enough to see the truth turn in my favor. When I turned off the light, I felt no fear. The house was still noisy, but inside my room, there was peace. My door was locked, my documents were safe, and my heart was steady. Let them shout, let them panic. The woman they ignored was finally untouchable. The next morning, the storm began. I had barely finished my tea when I heard the front gate slam. Cars stopped outside the house, one after another. My other children, the ones who rarely called, had arrived. I heard doors opening, voices rising, the sound of hurried footsteps. They hadn't visited me in years, but now, suddenly, they all remembered where I lived. I sat quietly in my chair, watching the morning light creep across the floor. I knew they were coming for me, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced silence for years. Noise couldn't hurt me anymore. They crowded outside my room, their voices overlapping. They called my name, knocked, asked to come in. Some pretended to sound cheerful, others didn't bother hiding their urgency. I could hear my daughter's voice breaking as she said she loved me. My son's voice came next, talking about family and trust. Every word sounded heavy with lies. I stayed still. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. I had waited for love for so long. Now I only heard greed. They begged me to open the door. They said they were worried. They said the media might come. They said we needed to manage the situation. That phrase made me smile. They hadn't managed to show kindness in years, but now they wanted to manage me. I looked at the lock on my door and felt safe. It was the same door that had kept me out of their lives for so long. Now it protected me. My grandson came again, standing among them, confused. He looked at their faces, then looked at the closed door. He didn't understand why everyone suddenly cared so much. He knocked softly, whispering my name. His voice was different, pure, worried, not greedy. I wanted to open the door for him, but I knew it would bring them all in. So I stayed quiet. I whispered to him through the wood that everything was fine. I told him to go to his room. He hesitated but listened. He was the only one who ever listened. The voices outside grew sharper. My daughter shouted that I was being unreasonable. My son said he needed to see the lottery papers to help me handle things. My daughter-in-law cried loudly, asking why I was angry. Their words were noise now, empty, hollow, too late. I looked at the newspaper on my table again. My name was still there, shining in black ink. That was all the proof I needed that I had already won more than money. I had won freedom. They stayed outside for hours. Sometimes they whispered, sometimes they argued. I could hear them calling relatives, telling them to come, telling them to talk sense into me. But no one could. I had lived through too much silence to be scared of sound. I brewed another cup of tea and sat by the window. The world outside looked bright, almost peaceful. I thought about how strange life was. All the years I had begged for attention, and now I had too much of it. When evening came, they were still there. Some had stopped pretending. I heard anger in their tone now. They said things like, "You owe us," and "This family made you." I smiled quietly. I had made the family. I had built everything they were standing on, but I didn't need to remind them. They knew. That was why they were afraid. They had lost control of the woman they once treated like furniture. At night, the house finally grew quiet. They must have realized I wouldn't open the door. I could hear them whispering in the hall, planning their next move. I turned off the light, lay down, and closed my eyes. I wasn't tired. I was calm. I knew they would try again tomorrow, but I also knew something they didn't. I had already transferred most of the winnings to a safe account in my name. I had gone to the bank early that morning before they arrived. I had done everything quietly, carefully, like someone who had learned not to trust noise. As I drifted to sleep, I heard the faint sound of my grandson's voice in the hallway, asking if I was okay. I smiled in the dark. I whispered softly, though he couldn't hear me, "I'm fine, my dear." For the first time, I'm truly fine. And I meant it. By the next morning, the house was quiet again. The shouting had stopped. The phones had gone silent. I sat by the window watching the sunlight fill my room. Everything looked calm, peaceful, almost as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. My children were still in the house, sitting together in the living room, whispering to each other. Their voices no longer sounded angry. They sounded lost. They had realized the truth, that I no longer belonged to them, and they no longer controlled me. I was free, and freedom is something they never expected me to have. I stood up slowly, opened my cupboard, and took out the small folder that held all my papers, my pension card, my ID, my lottery documents, and the new bank receipts. I looked through them carefully, one by one. My name was printed clearly on every page. For years I had seen my name disappear from everything I owned. Now it was back. It felt like getting my life returned to me, piece by piece. I smiled and closed the folder, holding it close to my chest. It was not about money anymore. It was about dignity. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the living room. All eyes turned to me. My children, who once couldn't look at me, now stared in silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say anything harsh. I just stood there and looked at them the way a mother looks at her children when she knows something they don't. I told them calmly that everything was already settled. The money was in my name alone. I had spoken to the officials and made plans for how it would be used. Their faces turned pale. My daughter-in-law's hands shook. My son's mouth opened, but no words came out. I had seen them confident all my life. This was the first time I saw them powerless. I told them I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. I told them I was leaving soon to live somewhere else, a place where people smiled when they saw me, where I could talk freely without being told I was embarrassing. They didn't believe me at first. They thought I was joking. Then they saw the papers in my hand, and their silence told me they finally understood. The woman they had ignored, belittled, and used had built her own walls now, and none of them could climb them. That evening I packed my bag. It didn't take long. I didn't have much, just a few clothes, some books, my medicines, and my husband's photograph. My grandson came into my room quietly, his eyes filled with worry. He asked if I was leaving him. I held his face gently and told him I would never leave his heart. I promised him that he could visit me anytime he wanted. I told him he was the only one who ever truly saw me. He hugged me tight and cried softly. That moment hurt and healed me at the same time. When the car came from the foundation, my children followed me outside. They tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, but I didn't want explanations anymore. Their words didn't matter. They had chosen greed over love long ago, and now they were left with neither. I looked at them one last time and said quietly, "You didn't love me when I was poor. Now you'll learn what that costs." Then I turned and walked away without looking back. The sound of the door closing behind me felt like the end of a long, painful story. At the foundation, they gave me a small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The walls were clean, the air smelled fresh, and there was laughter in the halls. People greeted me with warmth. I cooked my own meals again, made my tea just the way I liked it, and sat by the window in peace. Every day felt new. No one shouted. No one ignored me. No one made me feel small. I was just another person living with dignity. Sometimes I watched the news again. They still talked about me once in a while, the old woman who became a millionaire. But I didn't see myself that way. I didn't see money. I saw justice. Life had taken its time, but it had finally balanced the scales. The world that once forgot me had now remembered my name. At night, I lay in bed and whispered a small prayer of thanks. I didn't ask for more. I had enough. My heart was light, my mind clear. I thought about my grandson and smiled, hoping he would grow up knowing that love matters more than wealth. The people who once pitied me had to face the truth, that the woman they ignored had found peace without them. That was the real reward, not 10 million, not fame, but freedom. Quiet, steady, beautiful freedom.